Disclaimer: we are not medical professionals or specialists. This is merely a conversation of our opinions. We are not contradicting anyone's personal views or values. This is our conversation. Topics such as suicide and abuse may also be discussed. Viewers' discretion is advised.
Hey Stigma Busters, welcome to our 9th episode of the Living Beyond the Horizon podcast, Posh Mentality. So how are you guys today?
I'm pretty good, I guess, but last week was pretty stressful.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I feel like I'm still not suffering. The remnants of last week.
Oh my god, yeah, I know, the remnants, and just feeling kind of
it's still there. I'm trying to get rid of it, but I'm also wait, I have stuff when I come back. But what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to relax? Am I not supposed to? Yeah, so it's kind of a dilemma there, but at the end of the day, I'm I'm not double guessing myself, and I'm gonna go relax. So
Yeah, all right.
Angela?
I'm doing okay. Okay, so what are we talking about today, guys?
So today we'll be talking about Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, and also known, shortened as OCD. So OCD is a disorder in which people have reoccurring unwanted thoughts or ideas or sensations, so obsessions, and that make them feel driven to do something repetitively. So this is a compulsion, and these compulsions are often very addictive, very repetitive coping mechanisms, and because of how repetitive they are and because of the thought that's behind it, it can also be very unhealthy as well.
What defines OCD? So for OCD, like Taz said, it's the presence of obsessions, compulsions, or both. Obsessions are defined by recurrent and persistent thoughts, urges, or impulses that are experienced at some time during the disturbance as intrusive and unwanted, and that in most individuals cause a marked anxiety or distress. Obsessions can also be defined as individual attempts to ignore or suppress such thoughts, urges, or images, or to neutralize them with some other thought or action, such as by performing a compulsion.
And some repetitive behaviors, as going along with what Angela was saying, include hand washing, checking the doors if it's making sure that it's locked each time, or some mental acts which include praying or counting or repeating words silently. And these behaviors and mental acts are aimed at preventing and reducing the anxiety or distress, or preventing some dreaded event or situation. However, these behaviors or mental acts are not connected in a realistic way with what they're designed to neutralize or prevent, and are clearly excessive.
I think that kind of just means that the thing that they're obsessing with doesn't always kind of correlate or make sense to what they're using to because there's an obsessive thought, and then there is that that act that they're doing, and it doesn't always correlate. It doesn't always necessarily make sense to from an outsider's view, at least. If someone has a very it could be a really disturbing thought, right? And such as I think the most gruesome thing, you want to cause harm to someone or yourself, right? And in order to kind of cope with this in such a way, you could see someone organizing things to the point where even a little bit out of way is just oh my god, I get a little anxious when it's not like this or that. Does that make sense? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't relate to what the thought might be. So yeah. And I think that's something that, I think for the media as well, they only portray it from that, people with OCD are perfectionists. And I feel like I am one of them, for the longest time. I didn't really educate myself on why. So I didn't know it was because of this thought this reoccurring thought that they have, that, they have these type of habits that they develop in order to cope with it, or, right? So that was something I didn't know. And I always thought it was a perfectionist thing, so.
And then the sort of worst parts of these obsessions and compulsions, aside from having to deal with them, is that they're also very time consuming. They can even take more than an hour per day, which will really interfere with your daily tasks and what you're supposed to be doing instead, or even just relaxing. You can't stop doing what is you think is helping you to be less stressed when it's not really helping. And then these obsessions or compulsions can also cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of function. So like I just said, since it takes so much time, it's going to interfere with a lot of things that you want to do instead. And these symptoms are not attributable to physiological effects of a substance. So like a drug of abuse or a medication or another medical condition. And this disturbance is not really explained by the symptoms of another mental disorder too. So that is what defines OCD.
Yeah. So I think it's very important to learn exactly what OCD is because as we were talking about like the different levels of mental health, right? Some people usually use like terms that's around mental health, like they just kind of throw around the terms without really knowing the real meanings. Yeah. So yeah, some people just because maybe like maybe you're a really organized person, and then you say, oh, I have OCD, but that may not be the case because OCD is an actual like disorder that debilitates people in their life, right? So I think it's really important to know the difference between just like, I guess, being a perfectionist and having OCD, because OCD is a disorder.
Yeah. I think it's also important to acknowledge that like the reason people have OCD and like what's going on in their head, right? Because again, you know how we mentioned that these two, the habits that they do and then the thought that they have are so different. So you can never just, assume either. So just making sure that, okay, something else might be going on that they're not necessarily relaying or they're not necessarily telling everyone else is, something you should keep in mind as well. Common obsessions in children, right? So 40% of children might have intrusive thought about dirt and germs, right? And I think this kind of correlates with illness as well. Like if you get a dirt or germs, you could, possibly get sick, right? And I think COVID is probably a very big one right now too, just trying to keep clean, right? And then 25% would be, fire, death, right? And being faced with fire, being faced with like certain ways to die, I guess, right? Like you're constantly scared, like if I do this is gonna happen, just things like that. And then 17% symmetry and order. So symmetry and order is probably the one that we see the most, right? And especially on like TV media and stuff like that, because it kind of goes with like the perfectionist vibe or just being like, oh my God, I'm like really clean. I can't see any, dust on my windshield or whatever. And then 13% religious obsessions, and then 4% unpleasant and aggressive thoughts.
Yeah, so just as a little reminder, these obsessions that Taz has just listed out, those are all the thoughts, urges, or impulses that people, in this case, children, will most likely feel. So to suppress those thoughts are the compulsions. So in children, again, 85% will wash their hands, washing and grooming to suppress any of those thoughts listed above. And then 48% will do checking. So whether it's checking, like say, a locked door or windows to make sure that they're all closed before going to bed or when they get home, so that they can feel more safe instead of feeling any thoughts of fear. And then 38% will do rituals. So that could be like knocking on a surface, turning on and off the lights. It's just like sort of a routine they have to do each day or every time that they have that thought. And then 17% will do ordering. So this one, like Nina and Taz had mentioned, is organization. It's what is usually put into TV shows or movies where they want everything to look perfect. And if it's not, like say if there's a single red dot in the middle of a bunch of yellow ones, they'll have to take that one out because it's a compulsion. They have to do this.
So the OCD cycles are just how we kind of describe. So there's the obsession, right? So unwanted thoughts, urges, or mental images. So it kind of may include like, what if this happens, right? And you get that kind of anxiety as well. So you get that distress, fear, worry, or disgust. And it's a false alarm, right? and you feel the need to do something in order to suppress these thoughts. And in order to suppress these thoughts, right, you kind of go into compulsions, which is like a very addictive coping mechanism, which can often be very unhealthy and addictive. And right, it's any behavior performed to help make the anxiety go away, including checking and all the reasons told above. And you get relief, right? But it's a very temporary relief, right? Because you do it, and then at times that thought can come back. So it's not something that's permanent or actually stays for a while.
Yeah. And what are some causes of OCD? Well, some causes of OCD are communication errors in the brain. So OCD often affects parts of the brain such as the orbital frontal cortex and the anterior cingulate. And these can all be seen through neuroimaging.
Yeah. I think that's a really big one. I think another point that we wanted to mention is something that is often mentioned is circuits that wire together. And if I'm remembering this right, when you have a particular habit, your neurons will automatically kind of like latch together, right? And form that habit. And then when you do this over and over again, it kind of, right, when we think of habits, it's something that we do without even thinking something. So when these circuits, like, they come together, right, it becomes like this habit. But like after you have this thought, your brain's kind of wired to do this. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of just like, okay, I feel the need to do this particular thing. I think the simplest way I can say this is like if you have a habit of sleeping after school, right, and you've been doing this for like a year, right, you come after school and you go to sleep, right, and then if you stop doing it after a while, all right, if you stop doing it and you've been doing it for like a year, it's going to be weird because your brain's actually wired. Like you have like these circuits you have many of them kind of bonded together
because the brain makes connections, right?
Yeah, you make this connection, right? And then when you come home, you're going to feel tired and your body's going to be like, excuse me, we were supposed to do something, right? And then after a while, right, especially with like getting used to not going through with this habit, they will break, right? So, and then brain making connections, that's how we learn. And then there's other abnormalities in neurotransmitter systems, such as chemicals such as serotonin, dopamine, glutamine, and possibly others that send messages between brain cells that are involved in the disorder.
All right, and then so there is a genetic link in terms of OCD. So about 25% of people with OCD have immediate family members that also have the disorder. And so when scientists are doing research, they like to use twins, like twin studies, just because they're usually, raised in the same household. They have sort of the same childhood, the same parents, same family. They go through the same experiences, and they also have basically the same genetics. So twin studies have identified that if one twin has OCD, the other is more likely to have OCD when the twins are identical rather than fraternal. Identical twins come from the same egg and the same sperm. So when they are given birth to, they have the same DNA basically. There's very little variation. But when the twins are fraternal, so when they don't look the same, they come from two different eggs and two different sperm. So there's a lot of variation in their genetics. Although they have the same parents, because they didn't come from the same gametes, they don't have the same genetics mainly. So if the twins are identical, they'll be more likely to have that disorder. In this case, it is OCD. And so studies of twins with OCD estimate that genetics contribute approximately 45 to 65% of risk of developing the disorder. And then, so like I said before, identical twins will be more likely to develop OCD if the other one does also have it because they have a similar genetic build.
Yeah, and for some treatments of OCD, they're really similar to treatments we've described earlier for other disorders. A main one would be psychotherapy, where they provide exposure and response prevention therapy, which is known as ERT. They also provide cognitive therapy and also metacognitive therapy, which is like a judgment about your thought and like taking a step back and seeing your thoughts from another perspective.
Negative self-talk.
Yeah, and then kind of like thinking about your thinking, right?
Yeah.
And another one would be medications and people often use antidepressants, but it's really important to be careful of what medications you use and make sure you use them how they were prescribed by a doctor.
Yeah. So, as a little checkout for this episode, we want you to think about your own brain. Are there circuits that have wired together for you? Actions that, you associate with thoughts, maybe? So this might be experienced as things that often go together, or when something happens, when, like, say you typically have a craving to do something related to when you have a thought. For example, you may always brush your teeth after you shower at night. You might also feel an urge to smoke when you are having coffee in the morning. If you used to be a smoker and you would have a cigarette every day in the morning when you drank your coffee. So these associations can either be negative or positive, but see if you have any of them. Most likely you will. Just gotta look for it,
Yeah. I think that's a big one as well. Just we do have a lot of the habits that we don't usually realize. It can be something as like, I feel like even like for our phones, like, going on our phone before we sleep or waking up and going on our phone is something that becomes a habit too. And something that you don't think about. You just like, your hand goes there and you're kind of on autopilot and you're just like, how did this phone get in my hand? You know what I mean? Just like things like that.
So that is our episode. That's a wrap for today. Thank you for tuning in to another wonderful episode of Posh Mentality. We will see you in the next one. Stigma Busters out.